The voice of the Indiana Hoosiers, Don Fischer, brought to you by Southern Stone Restaurant, Patterson and Rogers in Bloomington. Stop by and get a taste of the Southern fare from Southern Stone. Welcome in, Don Fischer. Don, how are you after the long weekend, man? How's the voice holding up?
The voice is not very good, but it's better than it was on Saturday, without question. I feel a little bit better. My cold, I literally had a cold come on me. This has happened twice now in the last year. I literally wake up one morning with no symptoms of anything like that, and all of a sudden I got a cold. I mean, it literally is ridiculous. And so at any rate, I picked up this cold on Wednesday, which was a bad time to get it because that's what we traveled to Chicago. And by Saturday, I was almost out of voice when that game ended. I was really not happy that we got beat, but I was really happy about the fact that if I had to do another ball game, I might have been done by halftime.
Well, you get a chance to rest this week off until Friday. As a matter of fact, almost Saturday morning, Don. So you get on the entire week to rest, as Indiana won't tip until nearly 10 o'clock Friday night, which that is absolutely nuts. I'm sure you're not happy about that.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that we wouldn't be tipping off until 10 o'clock at night? Well, because nobody on the East Coast wants to stay up that late unless it's really a big name team.
Yes, people don't get. I keep telling Indiana is a brand, man. That's why they play these games, and Indiana is always involved in these certain things. It is a brand that sells. People watch Indiana and always have, and they always will. They need to win now. This is an opportunity they have not had for a while. They go into this NCAA tournament. Set last year, in talking to Trace when they first showed up for the Big Ten tournament, he said it was a different mindset because last year they had the stress of trying to make the NCAA tournament. Well, they're in. They didn't have to worry about that this year, and they don't have to worry about it now. And they don't have to worry about going to Portland and jetting around like you had to do with the first four in and all that stuff. So they get plenty of time off, and I think I got a favorable draw. Not that they have an easy path. There's no easy path in this tournament, but right. I think they got a favorable draw. They play Kent State first, and then a potential matchup with Miami if they can get by Drake.
Yeah, and Drake's not a bad team. I mean, Drake is a really good basketball team, and DeVries, the coach there, has done a phenomenal job since he's been there. I think this is his fifth season. They've been spectacular in the Missouri Valley, and they will be a challenge. There's no question about it. But I think it's a decent draw too. And of course, Miami, a really good basketball team, and Jim Larrañaga does a tremendous job with that program and has for years now, since coming over from George Mason. And they're going to be a very difficult team to beat. There's no question about that. But you got to get past the first one to get to the second one. So the only one you're really concerned about right now is Kent State, who is a really good defensive basketball team.
But that's
and it's funny. I remember speaking of Indiana playing Kent State back in 2002 when Indiana went to the championship game, Final Four. They upset Duke. In the famous game where Todd standing on the table, I think.
He never was on the table. He never got on the table, but he stood on his chair.
Okay.
He got up on his chair and he's going crazy, I love you, Don, and all this kind of crap. And it was really kind of fun, to say the least. We had a great time down there, no question about it. And Todd was not afraid to get excited.
No, not at all. But they win that big game, but they have to come back, and they had to play a Kent State team right after that. And
blew them away.
What's that?
They blew them away. I mean, yep. Indiana played in that ball game. Indiana knocked down 3-point shots like it was going out of style. Dane Fife got hot in that ball game. They had just a tremendous game against Kent State. It wasn't really close, and it'll change this time, I think. This team from Kent State, I think, is very good defensively, especially. They go small. They're not a big team, but they play really hard and they play really tough. You can't take anybody lightly when you get to this point in the tournament. They're just that simple. And if you are able to blow somebody out and rest your players, that's what everybody hopes for. But it's rarely happens. You've got to play hard.
Typically, Don, in these type of games, the higher seed, Indiana in this situation, would try to dictate tempo. But one of the things that's going to be interesting to me is you look up and down Kent State, their season. They've won games. They've not been afraid to play in the 70s. They're also not afraid to drag you into a phone booth and play games in the 40s. Yep. So I don't even know if tempo is going to be a big factor in this game, because I think Kent State, excuse me, I get mixed up with Kennesaw State. Kent State is capable of playing a variety of ways. For me, I think this is going to be one of those games where Indiana's defense is going to have to travel, because if you're not hitting shots, Kent State's perfectly fine winning the game 45-42.
Absolutely. They're going to be a challenge. I don't think it's going to be an easy ball game. And I don't think if you go into the NCAA tournament, it doesn't matter who you play. And if your mind's not right, like this is going to be a battle and you're going to have to match intensity. You're going to have to match toughness, all those kinds of things. You're going to get beat. I mean, and it's a one and done show, as everybody knows. And Indiana, even though they were in it just a short time last year, they had a play-in game. They beat Wyoming, and then they went out to Portland. It was not a good trip out to Portland, incidentally, if everybody remembers that they really didn't start out until 4 o'clock in the morning, which was ridiculous. But at the same time, they had to change planes, all these kind of problems travel-wise. I watched these players on that plane on the charter that night, and they couldn't get any sleep. They were walking around. Trey Galloway was actually trying to find someplace to get comfortable, laying on the floor, stuff like that. It was just a bad trip. And then they played a St. Mary's team that was really good and just kicked the snot out of them in the second half of that ball game. So honestly, you've got to go in with the right mindset. And this Indiana basketball team, with the guys that are back this year, with Miller Kopp, and even though X is not playing, he's on the bench. You got Trace and Race. These guys have all been there, and they are a part of that, and they knew what happened. So I think their mind should be right going into this tournament. It's not going to be easy no matter who they play, and if they look at it from that perspective, they'll give themselves a good chance to win.
Yeah, before you came on, I mentioned losing is never fun, but it may have been better for them to lose to Penn State than to make it to the title game of the Big Ten and lose to Purdue. Then you're losing a championship game to your rival, and then you deal with all that. I don't know if that would have changed things or not. I don't know, but I don't know if it matters now, because they're playing Kent State, and they play kind of like or Kent State rather, and Penn State is a team that plays kind of small as well, and was able to find some advantages against Indiana, and that's something that I don't know that Kent State has the talent that Penn State does. That can, if they can shoot like Penn State, because Penn State was able to knock the three down from different guys. They had so many guys that could knock it down.
Well, the big story here is, like I said before, Kent State's defense. That's the question mark. How will they attack Indiana from a defensive perspective? Because I think that's the kind of defense they play. They're attacking defensively. They're trying to make you turn the ball over. They're trying to be a team that's very difficult to score against. Will they, since they are smaller, how will they play Indiana defensively? Will they dig down like, a couple of teams have against Trace? Have guys come over. Michigan State did that very effectively against IU. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. But the big key, I think, for Indiana is to be able to have everybody step up and play their role in this ball game. Miller Kopp, Trey Galloway, those two guys didn't do much at all in the Big Ten tournament, especially the second game, the Penn State ball game. Galloway, I think, is just wore out. I think he's a guy that really needs this 4 or 5 days prior to this next ball game to kind of get his legs back. You know how hard he plays and has played all season long. He looked like he was not himself in those games up in Chicago. And so hopefully this really helps him kind of get back to who he is. But Miller's got to start shooting the basketball, and he can't worry about the first one not going down and then not taking hardly any of the rest of the ball game, especially when they're there. Race has got to play exceptional as he can. And I thought he played his best game of the year, in my opinion, against Michigan. He was just terrific in that game, how hard he played, that kind of thing. All these guys know what their role is, and they've got to fulfill that role if they're going to go anywhere in this tournament.
I know you're not a guy that likes to look ahead past the game immediately, so I don't want to get too far off here the beaten path. But at the same time,
do it anyway.
But I'm going to do it anyway. But the thing concerning me heading into this tournament for Indiana is they have not been able to string 2 games together really for about a month. Right. And you've got to win 2 games in 3 days. I mean, do you think that these recent struggles have been a factor of fatigue and exhaustion? In particular, I asked that question because, again, we talked about this maybe the past 2 weeks. They just don't get very much from their bench on a consistent basis. So the starters have to take on, they're carrying the world on their shoulders, it seems like, every single game.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, at this point in the season, your bench is always shortened, right? I mean, you shorten the bench. That's what coaches do. They're going to go with the guys they trust, especially in these circumstances. And so who do you trust? Well, the 2 guys that they trust the most right now are Malik Renew and Tamar Bates. Tamar Bates in the tournament past weekend played his best of the season, putting back-to-back games together, even though one was more prolific scoring-wise than the other. But the other thing about him, he's starting to play really good at the defensive end. He's keeping people in front of him. They're not getting by him. He is energetic out there in that regard. So if you've got 7 guys, and that's pretty much what all these teams do right now at this point in the year, they're basically playing 7, maybe 8 guys, and not much past that. Hardly anybody gives anybody a lot of minutes past those 7 guys. So we'll just see how it all plays out. But my feeling on this is that Indiana needed to get their legs back. So to get beat in the second game of the Big Ten tournament did not hurt them in that regard. So they've got more time to get their legs back, because I think this Big Ten tournament, or the Big Ten tournament, can really take it out of you if you go the 3 days. We'll see how Purdue fares from that perspective, even though they've probably got a pretty easy road. Texas Southern or Fairleigh Dickinson, their first opponent. So we'll see.
And that's interesting, because you could potentially have a Purdue Dusty May matchup in that second round, because if Florida Atlantic plays Memphis, and that's a 9th seed, so there could be a little bit of a rivalry in that second game. If I'm Purdue, I don't really care for that draw, considering how well FAU's played this year.
Yeah, they've been terrific, and Dusty's one of the really great people at IU that I've had a great relationship with for many years now. We played a lot of cards when Mike Davis was the head coach in Indiana in those 6 seasons that Mike was there. And we just had a ball. He's one of those really great, classy people from Indiana, former manager, an assistant coach under Coach Mike Davis back in the day. And I'm just so happy for him that his ball club's in there, and they've had such a fantastic season. It'll be interesting to see how they fare if they would end up playing Purdue in that second game.